Their cries were never written, their names never carved in stone. The chronicles of empires, Egypt, Rome, Mesopotamia, Greece, sing of kings, gods, and warriors, but not of the women who labored unseen beneath their shadows. In the heat of the Nile's sun, or under the marble halls of Athens, their lives began and ended without witness. They were the hands that rocked the children of emperors, the bodies that carried the burdens of temples, the whispers that history chose not to hear. Each civilization built its glory upon the quiet suffering of the enslaved, and among them, women bore the heaviest silence. To speak was rebellion, to feel was forbidden. Their tears fed the soil of kingdoms, their pain, the price of progress. No songs were sung for them, no monuments raised. They existed only in the margins, erased by power, buried by time. Yet if the stones of pyramids could speak, if the marble of Rome could breathe, they would tell of women who once stood in chains, who dreamed of freedom beneath the same stars that watched over their masters. These were not just slaves, they were daughters, mothers, lovers, human beings swallowed by history's indifference. And though centuries have passed, their silence still echoes. This is their story, the story of the unseen, the unheard, and the unforgiven. Every empire had its walls, grand, gleaming, impenetrable. But behind those walls, power hid its dirtiest secrets. Female slavery was never always on display. It lived in shadows, disguised by culture, sanctified by ritual, and justified by law. In Egypt, the palaces of Thebes and Memphis shimmered with gold, but within them, women served in silence. Some were captured from Nubia or foreign lands, others born into bondage. They washed the feet of queens, fanned the pharaohs, and slept at the edge of marble floors, their names reduced to whispers of ownership. In the temples, they were servants of the gods. But their divinity was pain, their bodies offered to priests in the name of sacred duty. In Greece, beauty was bondage. Slaves adorned the homes of philosophers, poets, and nobles. Some were prized for their youth and appearance, forced to dance, to entertain, to please. Even those who lived in luxury were prisoners wrapped in silk. A word out of place, a refusal to obey, could mean punishment or sale. The system was polished, intellectual, and cruelly efficient. Across Persia, the palatial harems became gilded prisons. Women brought from conquered lands were paraded like trophies of victory. The empire called it order. The women called it captivity. Their laughter was rehearsed, their silence enforced. Each night, they waited, not for freedom, but for a master's choice. And still, society looked away. Slave women were woven into the fabric of life, invisible and essential. They cooked, cleaned, raised heirs, and fulfilled desires, yet were denied even the right to own their breath. They were considered property, living, breathing tools of convenience and control. But power, in its arrogance, always hides what it fears most: truth. And the truth was this: behind every noble lineage, every royal bloodline, there flowed the unacknowledged labor and bodies of enslaved women. Their presence shaped dynasties, even when their names were never written. The temples called them sacred, the palaces called them necessary, the world called them nothing. Yet in their silence, history's most disturbing reality took form, a system so vast, so normalized, that entire civilizations thrived on it. Because slavery was not just in chains and collars, it was in rituals, in language, in law. It was dressed in robes of culture and called civilization itself. Obedience was not a virtue for the enslaved woman, it was a sentence. From the moment she was sold, her will ceased to exist. Every gesture, every glance, every breath belonged to someone else. Her life was reduced to a list of unspoken rules, rules older than the empires themselves. She could not speak unless spoken to. She could not eat before her masters. She could not cry, laugh, or show anger. Her silence was demanded, not requested. Her body was watched, her thoughts presumed. And in that suffocating order, her humanity slowly unraveled. In Egypt's temple complexes, female slaves served priests and gods alike. They bathed the sacred idols, carried offerings, and endured the weight of spiritual servitude. The temple was called holy ground, yet within its walls, holiness and horror intertwined. One wrong movement, one perceived impurity, and punishment followed. Some were beaten publicly to purify their souls. Others were simply erased, their names removed from temple records, their existence deemed unworthy of remembrance. In Rome, Obedience was measured through fear. A domestic slave who spoke back could be whipped, branded, or mutilated. Many bore scars shaped like their master's initials, living testaments to ownership. The law protected the master, not the victim. A Roman philosopher once wrote, "A slave's virtue is silence," and so silence became survival. Every task was a test of loyalty, every mistake a crime, a spilled cup, a torn fabric, a forgotten order, all could invite pain. The rules were not written because they didn't need to be. Every woman learned them through blood and terror. Yet beyond punishment lay something even more terrifying: control of emotion. Love, grief, and even hope were forbidden luxuries. A mother who lost her child to sale could not weep. A young girl violated by her owner could not scream. To feel was dangerous, to show feeling, deadly. Some tried to cling to faith, whispering prayers in languages their captors never understood. Others sang quietly while working, their songs laced with sorrow and defiance. But even that could be punished. In Persia, a single slave song once led to the whipping of 10 others, accused of spreading unrest through melody. Their world was a theater of obedience. To outsiders, they seemed calm, disciplined, even graceful. But inside, they carried storms that could never break. The calm was a disguise, a mask worn to stay alive. For some, obedience became a second skin, survival through surrender. For others, it became poison, a slow death of the spirit. The greatest punishment was not the lash, but the loss of self. Because obedience demanded more than submission of the body, it demanded the erasure of identity. The enslaved woman ceased to be a person. She became function, service, shadow, and the cruelest part, the world saw her obedience as virtue. Centuries later, historians still write of kings, generals, and merchants, but not of the women who kept their world standing. The price they paid was not counted in coins, but in dignity, in memory, in silence. Desire, in the world of the enslaved, was never a choice. It was command, conquest, or curse. For female slaves, their bodies were never their own. Behind palace doors and temple chambers, desire wore the face of power. In Egypt, the pharaoh's harem was not a place of beauty, but a labyrinth of silent torment. Women from conquered lands were brought as gifts: Nubian, Syrian, Greek, each one a token of diplomacy or dominance. They were trained to smile, to serve, to obey. Some became favorites, others were forgotten. And every favor came with fear, for affection from a master could vanish overnight, replaced by cruelty or death. In Greece, where art celebrated the perfection of the human form, the truth was uglier. Female slaves were both muses and victims. A poet might write of love while owning the very woman he claimed to adore. Desire, cloaked as inspiration, was simply possession made poetic. Pregnancy for an enslaved woman was perhaps the most dangerous fate of all. A child could mean punishment or privilege, depending on whose blood ran in its veins. In Rome, a child born of a slave mother was automatically a slave, property from the moment of birth. Some mothers hid their pregnancies, binding their stomachs, praying the child would not cry. Others, forced into motherhood, watched their babies sold before they could even speak their names. And yet, in secret, love still bloomed. A stolen glance between servants, a whispered promise in the dark. Some women found comfort in each other's arms, fleeting moments of humanity amid cruelty. These hidden affections were acts of rebellion, proof that even the enslaved could still feel, still dream, still defy. But not all masters were blind to those sparks. In Persia's royal courts, jealousy among mistresses and wives often led to death sentences for slave women accused of seducing their masters. Many times the accusations were lies, excuses to eliminate rivals. A woman's beauty could both raise her above the others and seal her doom. Some, desperate to survive, learned to use desire as a weapon. They studied their master's moods, mimicked devotion, and earned protection through submission. It was not love, it was strategy. A game where losing meant torture, and winning meant captivity and comfort. And for the children born of these unions, life began in chains. Some were quietly killed to preserve a mistress's honor. Others were hidden, adopted into households, their origins whispered about, but never spoken aloud. In the chronicles of ancient households, you find no record of them, but their bloodlines flowed through the same veins that claimed divine descent. Motherhood, the most sacred of human bonds, became a battlefield between love and fear, creation and destruction, survival and shame. To give life was to risk death, and through it all, the enslaved woman carried her silence like armor, her body, her womb, her voice, all claimed by others. Yet within her, the quiet flame of defiance refused to die. Rebellion did not always begin with fire or swords. Sometimes, it began with a whisper, a stolen key, a look held too long. For enslaved women, defiance rarely came in open battle. It lived in the shadows, subtle and dangerous, blooming where fear had long taken root. In the dim kitchens of Roman villas, some women slipped poison into their master's wine. In the vast estates of Persia, a servant might switch labels on expensive oils, ruining shipments meant for trade. These were not grand revolts, they were quiet victories, small acts of vengeance that let the oppressed feel human again. Others chose endurance itself as rebellion. They refused to break, no matter how cruelly the world bent them. A slave in Athens once endured years of torment, only to escape under the cover of night, disguised as a merchant boy. She vanished into the streets, her name lost, her legend whispered by others who dreamed of doing the same. In Egypt, there are fragments of records about women who fled the temples of Amun, vanishing into the desert. Some were caught and executed. Others, historians believe, found sanctuary among wandering tribes. Their escape was a death sentence if discovered, but even the attempt was defiance, an unspoken declaration that they still owned their will. Rebellion also took form in legacy. Enslaved women taught forbidden songs, lullabies layered with secret meanings to their children. Within those verses hid lessons of endurance and identity, coded memories that outlived empires. Even when masters tried to erase their languages, they passed them down in murmured prayers and bedtime stories. Not all resistance was physical. Some women became shadows in another way, masters of silence and observation. They listened, learned, and sometimes used secrets as their only weapon. A whispered betrayal, a well-timed rumor, these quiet acts could crumble households, topple fortunes. Power, after all, can fall to a single truth, spoken at the right moment. In Persia's grand courts, one slave woman was said to have exposed a noble's treachery to the king, saving her life by sacrificing his. In Rome, another was rumored to have set fire to her owner's villa, walking calmly into the flames. Her body was never found, but her story spread, part myth, part warning. Even submission could be rebellion. To smile after punishment, to nurture a child in secret, to survive another day in a world built to erase you. These were victories that history would never record, but they mattered to the women who lived them. They fought not with armies, but with endurance. Their rebellion was not to destroy kingdoms, but to outlast them. And in doing so, they proved that even within the tightest chains, humanity could not be completely broken, because no master, no empire, no god could own the will to hope. That was the one thing too wild to enslave. Time buried their bodies beneath the dust of empires, yet their silence still hums beneath history's noise. The pyramids, the marble columns, the ruins that tourists marvel at today, all of them stand upon bones that were never honored, upon voices that were never heard. Every civilization wrote its triumphs in ink, but its sins in silence. The female slaves of the ancient world are long gone, yet their stories haunt what remains. You can almost hear them in the empty corridors of palaces, in the cracks of old stone, in the lullabies that crossed generations and seas. They are the women who labored, who bled, who loved in captivity, the ones who gave birth to children who never bore their names, who carried the weight of gods and kings on their backs, only to vanish from record as if they never existed. But history is not as quiet as it seems. Their pain lingers in the myths of fallen queens, in the poetry of sorrow, in the collective ache of every silenced voice that came after. The chains may have rusted, but the memory of bondage endures, shaping the world that followed. For centuries, women's voices were controlled, rewritten, dismissed. But to remember them is to reclaim truth. To speak their names, even if they were never written, is to challenge the silence that buried them. Empires rise, rulers fall, but the echoes of the enslaved never fade. They live not in statues or scrolls, but in the conscience of humanity, in the understanding that freedom, once denied, can never be taken for granted again. History remembers kings, but the truth lives in the whispers of those it silenced. And those whispers, the voices of forgotten women, still speak, soft yet eternal, reminding us that even in the darkest ages, silence was never the end.